Okay, so there's also instances of synchronicities getting maybe misattributed to being manifestation, reality creation. And, some people listening to this may not be familiar with the subject of synchronicity. So, just really quickly, the definition of synchronicity, as defined by Carl Jung, is, quote, the experience of two or more events which are causally unrelated occurring together in a supposedly meaningful manner, end quote. So just basically really meaningful coincidences that happen. But in my case, it's been the type of synchronicities I've experienced over the years is usually just astronomical and improbable in the things that are happening. And I get into all of this actually on my website in an article called Synchronicities, where I document the type of synchronicities I've had and the different categories of synchronicities that I've noticed. And then I get into all the, my different theories as to how synchronicities actually happen. And I even mentioned in that article the idea of synchronicities kind of intertwining with manifestation sometimes and being mistaken for each other. And so I know me and you have a really amazing and just astronomically improbable synchronicity / manifestation moment that happened years ago back when we were living in Charlottesville. It's like, okay, so to try to basically summarize, me and you had gone to Kmart because I had to do a return. So I did my return, and then we were on the way out, and you noticed the stack of Seaville Weekly free newspapers by the door, and you pointed it out to me to see if I wanted any, because I usually would use them as kitty box liners for the litter box. And so I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So I just grabbed a stack of the free newspapers on the way out, and then we got back in my car, and then we decided on the spot to do just a drive up Route 20, and just because it was late afternoon, it was really beautiful. Let's just go for a nice drive in the countryside, basically. So we're going for a drive, and then at a random point on Route 20, I decided, okay, let's just turn around and start heading back. So picked a random spot to do a U-turn, start heading back, and it was on our way back that we noticed on the side of the road a really large bird of prey that was taking off with something in its talons. And to me, it looked like, because it was kind of smallish and dark, and I was thinking it might be a mole or some kind of a rodent. I don't know what it was, but we're just kind of marveling at this bird that you don't normally see, and we're just trying to figure out what kind of bird is that. And that's where you mused oh, maybe it's an eagle. And I just started laughing, it's not an eagle. You don't see eagles, I don't know. And I was just kind of laughing. And then then you just tossed out another one, falcon. Maybe it's a falcon. And I started laughing about that. And then you guessed hawk. It's just all these exotic, birds of prey that you're trying to guess. And so I was just kind of laughing, because who knows what it really was. So then we get home, and I got that stack of Seaville Weeklies, and when we were getting inside, I flipped to the back where they had the rant section, and it was this hotline that Seaville Weekly had. I don't know if they still do this, but where you call in and you just rant about any issue that bugs you or just some topic that interests you, and they print it in the back of the Seaville Weekly, anything. So that particular Seaville Weekly had a rant where a guy was ranting about hawks, eagles, and falcons, saying oh, they're so sweet. It was kind of a joke rant, but saying, oh, they're so sweet. I mean, there was colorful language in it that I'm leaving out. And I want to hear more chatter about birds, Seaville, and hawks, eagles, falcons, da-da-da. And he name checked those 3 birds specifically, and only those 3 birds. So the odds of that happening were just astronomical. And the things that had to align to make that entire synchronicity happen was improbable. Just happen to go to Kmart, to happen to do a return, you happen to point out the Seaville Weekly. Sure, I grabbed them. We happen to do a little drive on the road, happen to turn around right at that spot just in time to see that bird, So the whole thing just aligned. And then the question is, though, why was that synchronicity happening? Because it wasn't the only weird thing happening that week. I also had ear tones, number sightings, and other types of woo-woo phenomenon that I've discussed on my website. So that whole week just had some kind of weird stuff going on. You also had an additional weird unusual event that happened, which we can get back to in a second. But the whole reason we realized that this stuff was happening was because you had intended for reality to wow you. So I'm sure you remember that. Like you literally intended for improbable things to start happening in your reality and to feel wowed by it. And that entire week culminated with an unexpected visit from your dad, visiting from Germany, whom you hadn't seen in years, and doing so because your 30th birthday was coming up at the time. So you were turning 30. And so he just like showed up for a surprise visit to Charlottesville.
Yeah.
And so it was like all of this stuff leading up to that, the ear tones, the numbers, the crazy synchronicities. And then you had your additional thing that happened involving that group.
Yeah, well, yeah, so basically the week prior, I was experimenting with different ways to up my vibes. A lot of times, most people, they focus on gratitude or some sort of jubilance, like some sort of optimism about the future. Well, I decided to focus on something different. Like, what about the feeling of awe, wonder, amazement, shock, And so the way I was doing it, before I would step out of bed in the mornings or in the afternoons, because I sleep late, but before I step out of bed and maybe during a nap during the day or something, I would focus for maybe 5-10 minutes just on that feeling, just that feeling in itself, the different thoughts, words that would come out of my mouth if I had that feeling, like, oh, wow, this is so amazing, like, wow. And like, not just saying it, but truly feeling it. Mm-hmm. I think some people would find that hard to do, to, you tell them like, okay, feel the feeling of wonder and awe. And then they would wonder, okay, well, what is it that I should be feeling that about? They need some sort of subject to induce that. Well, I don't need that. I can just focus on the thing itself and over a span of a couple minutes, induce that feeling in me and really, really get into it. And so after doing that, every day for about a week, weird things started happening.
Yeah.
I remember
that sync and
yeah. So that's that particular synchronicity was one. Mm-hmm. Another is that I was contacted out of the blue by this guy who was responsible for the Nexus 7 writings. The 33 arcs of soul resonance, evolution, and top secret / demon document. Because I'd been reading that stuff for years, and actually, me and a buddy of mine, we coordinated to get that material back onto the internet, because it came out briefly on the truefacts.org website back in '99, and then it disappeared, and there's really no way to retrieve it, and the web archive was incomplete. So he happened to have hard copies of it, because he was a weirdo like me, subscribing to the Leading Edge Research Journal, and he had hard copies of that particular issue. So he scanned it, and then I put it on the web. So anyway, I was thinking a lot about that many months earlier. I wasn't thinking about it recently during that time.
Yeah.
But I had been wondering, like, who is this Nexus 7 group? Mm-hmm. Like, who the heck are they? They're really smart. They know a lot. And so one day during that week, I was contacted by email out of the blue by the guy who was responsible for it. So he ended up being an awesome guy. Like, if you've ever seen the show Devs, the developer guy, the guy who heads up the corporation in that, this mysterious tech guru, he's that kind of guy, So he was really cool. He's a really cool guy. He gave me a lot of information, and I learned a lot from him. Yeah, he's a real nice guy. So that was really, really surprising. It's almost like meeting Morpheus or something in the Matrix. So that happened, and then that synchronicity happened, and then at the end of that week,
your dad happened.
Yeah, all of a sudden I get a phone call, and I think you got the phone call.
Yeah, I got the phone call, and I'd never spoken to your dad before. So.
Yeah, and you thought it was like some Middle Eastern guy that got the wrong number.
His German accent didn't sound like any German like that you normally hear in the movies. It sounded Middle Eastern to me. It was interesting. So, and the caller ID came up as the Super 8 motel, and I'm like, there's some Middle Eastern guy from the Super 8 who's asking for you.
Yeah,
so
the Libyans.
It's the Libyans. Where's their plutonium? No.
Right.
So I hand it off to you, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, hey, it's your dad,
Yeah, I was like talking to him like, oh, hey, like I was thinking like, how are things back in, I don't know if he was in Germany or Philippines at the time, but
right.
Yeah, but he's like, no, he's right here in town. And I was like, what? And I was truly shocked. I was shocked.
You were, yeah.
I was awed.
You were.
I was like, what? I can't believe it, after a week of other weird things. Yeah, so that was interesting for my 30th birthday, seeing my dad for the first time in almost 10 years.
Yeah, and so, you look at the end result of all that, and you can kind of see, it wasn't just synchronicities the synchronicities fit into a bigger picture. It was a lot more than that. So it was kind of the result of improbable manifestation, and almost kind of like what I would call like spilling backwards in the timeline and creates ripples of some sort.
Right.
So it's almost like the synchronicities were a byproduct of how this reality operates and of your manifestation efforts, but it kind of becomes intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that I wasn't intending for anything specific.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't like I want this particular thing.
Right.
It was just focusing on one emotional vibration, just one emotional vibrational pattern, and doing that every day for at least a week.
Right, and it ties back into everything we said at the beginning, that one of the absolute number one keys of manifestation is the emotional component. So you have to emotionally really feel kind of something, even if it's accidentally. You don't even realize you're doing it. You're slipping into like spacing out, and you slip into this emotional thing where you're being specific about what you like or want. And in your case, you were being very specific about this feeling of awe. So
Yeah.
while intending for that, you had to feel it.
Yeah, I was totally feeling it. And, people might be wondering why do you need emotion to do that? And I think it ties into the idea of thought forms, because thought forms, these little autonomous constructs in the ether, you need emotions to energize them, to give them life, to breathe life into them. That's one theory. The other theory is that emotions are the thing that can penetrate down into your subconscious. Like if you just think some superficial conscious thought, it's not going to get down in there. But if you have a very strong emotional charge behind it, that is what pounds it down into your subconscious, both for good and for bad. I mean, for good in terms of manifesting like this, but bad also in terms of trauma, traumatizing events that happen in life with a strong emotional charge. Those get buried in your subconscious, bundled together with these false, distorted beliefs. And then now they're in your subconscious, and now they distort not only your thoughts and your behaviors going forward in life, but they also act as almost like a artificial false karma bundles of energy that attract corresponding experiences to you subconsciously through these wounds that are in there, that have been implanted, that could have been in there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was pretty interesting, that just the emotional charge in itself can do that. I mean, not to mention emotions are also associated with the astral body. And the astral body, as opposed to the etheric body, the astral body is more non-local, which means it's not as localized in space and time. And because it's not localized in time, therefore maybe it bleeds more into the future and into the past, in a non-linear kind of way. And so maybe emotions are the things that send ripples into, throughout the timeline and create and end up somehow creating these weird synchronicities sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I've definitely had a lot of weird synchronicities. Like another good example is, once again, when I was researching alchemy quite heavily, you and I, we had gone to a nature park nearby, Wakotahachie, I believe it was. And we were walking around on the boardwalk over the wetland area, looking at all the birds, and it was a pretty beautiful day. And all of a sudden, this father chases his kid, and right in front of me, as he gets to his kid and kind of like teases him, he goes, "Grr, grr," like literally saying "grr," like that.
Which
And-
I have never seen a parent do that before. Like do that grr, grr, and just saying that word like that.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you can explain it in ways like that's what you say if it's you pretend to be a tiger or
Yes,
like.
but how often have you ever, how
Yeah.
often do we ever see that actually being said?
Right.
And it happened right in front of you.
Yeah, the timing of it and the position of it, that was weird. It was meant for me to notice, right?
Right.
And, to anyone else, big deal. Like, what the heck does "gur" even mean? Well, for me, I had been researching in alchemy how to produce this particular substance called gur.
Right.
Spelled G-U-R. I mean, in German, I guess they pronounce it "gur," but I always pronounced it "gur." And I figured it out by accident how to make it. So, I mean, I figured it out. So, okay, I thought that was weird. And then, so after we were done walking around and looking at all the cool birds, we drove back, and I realized, well, you know what? Let's just stop by this Publix here, this grocery store, and I need a couple things, maybe a drink or something, I forget. So we stopped by there, and then getting back in the car in the parking lot, as we were pulling out, I look over and I see a license plate that says, "Hey," H-E-Y. Yeah, obviously the person who has that thought it was funny just to have a "hey" on their license plate. But, I thought, okay, well, that's kind of weird. Like, I had the "gur" thing earlier trying to get my attention, and then now I've got this license plate that says "hey." So I realized, okay, well, if that's the case, then hey, about what? Like, am I supposed to look at something else? And then at that exact moment, I happened to also glance right. And what do I see on another license plate? A chemical formula called CuSO4, which means copper to sulfate, also known as blue copperas. And copperas is the exact thing in the alchemy thing that I had been working on to turn into gore.
God.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically it's green copperas that I was working with, but blue copperas is what was on this license plate, CUSO4. And it makes you wonder, okay, what two funny guys? One has hay on the license plate, and another one that decides, hey, it'd be cool if I just had a chemical formula on my license plate.
Right.
Like, who does that?
Right.
And if you are like a chemistry major, I mean, wouldn't you just have something on there like atom or DNA or, I don't know, just something more common?
H2O.
Yeah, exactly. H2O. H2O, DNA, whatever. But no, it was CUSO4, which, it's cool. It's a blue colored crystal. It looks really nice. I remember playing with it as a kid in my chemistry set. So that was weird. So yeah, that was 3 synchronicities in one day related. Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately related to the alchemy stuff that I was into. So it's weird when you think about how that happens.
Yeah. And do you feel like you somehow manifested that in some sort of way? Like, because you were kind of searching for answers in alchemy. You were trying to figure stuff out and, kind of maybe.
Yeah, it had been on my mind for sure.
Yeah.
So it had been on my mind for quite a while, and I probably did bend probability to make that happen. On the other hand, although I don't quite remember if anything happened afterwards in terms of some sort of disruption or timeline split or, some sort of big choice point in my life. But if there had been something, let's say 24 hours later, then that would have been a precursor sync to something coming up, but I don't remember if there was or not. So, but I do know for sure that I'd been thinking heavily about the alchemy subject.
Right. And having questions and wondering, yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. It's an ongoing project you're always doing.
Right. And that's interesting too, that it's not necessarily, oh, I'm trying to manifest alchemy syncs.
Right.
You can just be thinking about something inadvertently and it just starts pulling things in.
And it is like a message also, like stuff trying to, show that you're on the right path or something. And you've had other synchronicities, which, the whole subject of synchronicities is amazing and it's super fascinating to me. Both of us have so much experience with it, but there's been, other synchronicities that you've had where there's messages on license plates and it seems to be confirming research that you're doing and projects you're involved in. Kind of like, just giving you almost like a thumbs up or a corroboration or letting you know you're on the right track or like, a big yes, you know what I mean? Like you've had a few of those.
Yeah, I remember back in 2002 when you and I were going on a trip to visit some people. And when we pulled onto the road, there was a car in front of us that had Loosh on the license plate. LOOOSH. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And that's all it said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had other times where on the license plate it said like 4DSTO.
Wow.
It just said that on it. Makes you wonder what the person thought in their mind it meant. But
right.
obviously we know what it meant, like fourth density service to others.
Right. Yeah, and Loosh was a big, huge, again, Loosh being the energy that stuff can feed on in other realms. That ended up being a massive component of things that ended up happening with this particular group that we were visiting. And they went after you later on in a big time, very public, worldwide way on the internets, and the amount of Loosh that they created from both of us, it's unbelievable. So that's a pretty crazy level sync, almost like foretelling things to come with them.
Yeah, it was a foreshadowing. And other weird symbolic syncs, like I remember visiting these people and we did some karaoke.
Yeah.
And I just chose a song at random and it was Total Eclipse of the Heart. And that was kind of meaningful of how they kind of ended up losing their heart and turning dark.
Oh yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Or one night I was staying overnight and I got a random phone call at 2:52 in the morning, and the time was weird because 2:52 that's a 141 plus 111. Well, so 141 for me is a sort of a negative synchronistic number. When I see 141, that means either I'm screwing up and I'm moving towards a negative probable future, or negative forces from a negative probable future are coming closer towards me. So some sort of a proximity warning to negativity. So it was that bundled within a 111, which normally is a good thing. So, because at the time I thought this group was great, like, hey, this is going to be pretty awesome, like working with these people. But yeah, it ended up having a very dark core to it.
Oh yeah, and they burned bridges with literally every single person that they worked with, like famous or non. They couldn't get along with anybody. So it wasn't you.
Yeah, Loosh on the license plate was definitely foreshadowing of what we were heading into.
Yeah. All right. Well, another thing we mentioned at the beginning of the section was the way in which sometimes karma can get misinterpreted for manifestation and vice versa. So, yeah, this is an interesting subject. But when, I first realized for myself that karma isn't what we think it is, it was like way back in 2007 or so. And it is so weird and random, but there was a story in the news at the time that the pilot of the Enola Gay, which was, for people who know even basic history, that was the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. But he had just passed away. So there's a big story in the news about his passing. And, he lived to old age. And in the article, his family members or whatever that they interviewed were saying that he never regretted what he did, being the pilot of that plane dropping that bomb, which, killed over 80,000 civilians. He never regretted it. And he just, lived to old age and died peacefully in bed surrounded by loved ones. So that was just interesting because it really gave me pause. I mean, that was like the first time I just stopped and I'm like, well, that's interesting. A lot of people would say, doing something like that, you should have karma kind of chasing after you, basically. And apparently not, like I said, he had a good life. He had family, lived to old age, died peacefully. So I was just like, what's up with that? It just started getting me thinking about the subject of karma in a way that I'd never thought before. I'd never drilled down on it. And one theory I came up with at the time is I realized that maybe the key was the way in which he never regretted anything. Probably even truly believed he was doing the Lord's work, and a lot of people would also agree with him and think he was because they would believe, he helped us stop World War II, blah, 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 which is a whole subject in itself. But I did, not long after that, I saw somebody on the net for a completely unrelated reason. It was in a comment somewhere saying that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, that karma is just the misunderstood law of attraction. And I thought about that. I'm like, wow. Yeah, I realized, they were right. And it was due to the realizations I'd already had about this, including the story just mentioned about the pilot dying without seeming to have ever had any kind of bad karma for what he had done. So I realized that, oftentimes karma really is about the thoughts and intentions that we have going through our head and kicking around in our personal field. So if they're negative, they can wind up backfiring on you. So in this case with the pilot, obviously he had zero negative thoughts whatsoever. He was just doing his job as far as he was concerned, had no regrets, really believed he did a good thing. And therefore, it's almost kind of like nothing bad ever happened to him as a result. And so you kind of put two and two together about this.
Like some people wonder, why is it then that, some of these psychopathic, successful people don't ever get any blowback?
Right.
Whereas other people who are very kind-hearted, poor, they live these nice, small, loving lives, let's say middle America, and then they get wiped out by natural disasters or...
Right, and I had similar thought, like when George Bush Sr. died, that guy never had any karmic blowback, and I feel like that's a truly evil man, and he just lived to old age, died peacefully, surrounded by his family, whatever they really are, if they're even human, I don't know, but you talk about someone who never got any karma, that's another, I think, even better example that I was thinking about as well, like George Bush, versus everyday good people.
Yeah, right. I think some of these everyday good people, it's not that they're attracting bad necessarily, like through self-imposed karmic blowback for being bad people. No, not at all. I think it's because subconsciously they believe, number one, that they're small. Number two, that life is tough, and that it's just a rough life where things just happen, and they know other people who are down on their luck. We're just down on our luck. We're trying our hardest. We're trying,
mm-hmm.
And so it becomes a reinforcement of the idea that misfortune can happen, and it does happen, and you're subject to it.
Right, because you're small and you're nobody and you're poor, and
yeah, it's like you're humble and self-deprecating to the point of self-harm in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like even though they don't intend it,
right.
It's just understood. It's accepted. It's like the root assumption of the reality. In contrast to these pompous, unapologetic, never shameful, dark elites.
Yeah.
Or even just certain nasty types of rich people that they step over everyone, but they're just so full of themselves. The idea of failure and punishment and guilt just never crosses their mind for even a second.
Right.
So they're never pushing that out there. Contrast those two things. obviously one's going to be attracting misfortune more than the other is, just through exactly the law of attraction. But on the other hand, I do believe that karma is a separate thing, a real thing, and separate, right? But
Yeah.
but here we're just talking about a limited case.
Yeah, like there's different types of karma, and there's an aspect of what people think is karma that may not be. It really has to do with one's own subconscious programming and the thoughts you got kicking around on the forefront of your mind. It's about your vibe, your frequency. So what people think is karma really isn't. And I had a really amazing example of this that, if nothing else, perfectly illustrates this more than this chick I used to work with back in Charlottesville. I had this job that I always kind of jokingly call my big cheese job to keep it anonymous, because it was a very high up level job, and I want to keep it anonymous. But I had this coworker from hell that I was chain gang to for the 4 years I worked there. I mean, we both sat side by side at the front desk at this high-end big cheese job, but her name was Terry. And at the time I started working at this job in 2008, she was 45. So she's a grown adult woman who should know better. But her behavior, it was like she never developed past high school level. So she was constantly gossiping about people, like just constant shit talking, making fun of everybody that we worked with, and people in other departments, just always mocking people. She would try to get people fighting with each other because she just loved to see people fighting. It was like entertainment for her, just kind of sit back and like, this is fun, And if people weren't fighting, she would resort to making up lies to try to get people to fight, just so she could be amused, for her own personal entertainment. So she would go back and forth like pss, 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 in people's ears and like make up lies that the other person didn't actually say, and just spread lies and gossip about people that wasn't true. She hated to see anybody doing well or succeeding with their dreams. That would just make her jealous, and and so she was jealous about positive relationships. So she hated to see people that were happy together, married or just partnered up. She was addicted to like these violent horror freak show movies. Like, they're not even normal horror movies that we've all heard of, like A-level horror movies. These were like C and D level stuff that was like straight to video, the most gruesome, like disgusting movies. And like, we both worked a second job together, and she had a portable DVD player that she was given as a gift by her fiance. And she, in between taking calls at this job that we worked at together on the side, she would watch these movies, and she was like addicted. So during like a 6-hour shift or something, she would work her way through like 3 of these movies and get herself all amped up. Like you could almost see like demons taking her over. And as soon as one movie was over, she'd immediately take it out, put the next one in. And when that was over, she'd put the next one in. And then she'd get really nasty and angry anytime a call came in that, she actually had to do her job and, answer the phone. And she'd be really nasty to the people on the phone because they were interrupting with her demonic freak fair movies that she was trying to watch. So, and she also spent like her free time after work gambling online and just drinking like every night. That's all she did. She didn't have any like hobbies, and she would just massively bully anybody that she knew was beneath her and where she could get away with it. So like vendors that would come into our office, or repair people, people that were nobody, so she could just really be nasty to them and push them around. And it was just horrible. So, and I remember I used to like knit for charity at that time. I was really into knitting, and she would just act like I was like a freak for doing that. Like, who knits for free? Like, you knit all this stuff and you just give it away. That's so weird. Like, so the idea of like charity and altruism were just completely foreign to her. She never did anything helpful to help anybody. It was all about her all the time and like, what's in it for me? So she was like the most unaltruistic, uncharitable, selfish, self-serving, STS, unhelpful, what's in it for me person that I have ever personally known. Like, one of the worst cases I've ever seen. And, meanwhile, you've also simultaneously have never seen somebody with so much bad luck and misfortune happening to them. So there's a reason I'm getting into all these details about this person, because there is a really important point to get out of it. So her entire life was spent just like engaging in negative thoughts and behaviors and personal activities, like, with the gambling and the drinking and the horror movies, and not doing anything positive or really meaningful with hobbies. And meanwhile, she was just mired in constant like financial troubles, relationship troubles, health troubles, as well as like accidents that cause permanent injury, and all of which were interfering with her big dreams and goals. So, in my opinion, it's because all the negativity that she wished would happen to others and saturated herself with as entertainment just kept blowing back on her. So, that's the way I look at it is this, when most of your life is devoted to negativity, thinking negatively, behaving negatively, wishing for negativity, watching negative, nasty entertainment, then how can you not wind up drawing that into yourself?
Right.
It's kicking around in your field. That's what you're surrounding yourself with. And again, she was a really extreme case. I know the average person is not like this. I've been at a ton of jobs since then, and nobody comes close to being like this. So she was kind of exceptional. I really, really believe she had demonic attachments going on, that she had drawn into herself, and she just fully allowed them to take reign. Another thing she wanted to do, I remember her big goal was to open a strip joint with her fiance, open a strip joint in Charlottesville, because she even said this. She wants to, like, she doesn't like the good vibe of Charlottesville. She wanted to muck it up and bring in that dirty sex element, because she knew it would piss, the good people off, and it would kind of, muck up Charlottesville. Of course, it didn't end up happening. But that's the type of goal she's got. Like, what kind of a normal person has that as a goal? Not just to start a strip joint, but purposely to piss off good people and muck up nice things. So it was a very sick and toxic and very demonic vibe that she had. And again, you've just never seen somebody with so much bad luck and misfortune and financial problems as this person. And I really believe it's because everything that she was wishing for others and wanting to see happen to others, she just kept drawing it in to herself. So in that sense, what might initially seem like karmic payback, like karma is like punishing her for her bad thoughts or bad behaviors, I just really believe it was her attracting it in. And I've seen this play out with some other people as well. I won't sidetrack, it's not necessary. I think she's the ultimate example, but I have seen that as well. People who wanted bad for others, and it just ended up happening to them because it's what's kicking around, in their personal field. And in the meantime, though, kind of tying back to what you said earlier, that, there is a genuine form of karma. There is actual karma. And she may actually have accumulated some real karma from her behaviors, but there's also a form of manifestation blowback happening too.
Yeah, so it seems to me that karma is quite a multifaceted phenomenon. Because what you're just talking about right now, that's more like the mechanistic component of it. Mechanistic in the sense of, if you project certain thoughts, if you are a certain way, you're going to attract similar things back to you, right, which can oftentimes be interpreted as some sort of karma, like in the case of your coworker at the big cheese job. Now, there's also, I think, a moralistic dimension to it. And the question is, well, how do the two tie together? And I think the moralistic aspect of karma, I think it has to do with the fact that the conscious mind isn't the only thing that's running the show here. We also have a subconscious, which is, just the doorway to the rest of our being, because what we are here in 3D, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what is the rest of the iceberg under the water, right? And that's the rest of our being. And if you do something and you have a spirit, if you have spirit, that means you have conscience. And so no matter how much you deny it on the surface, there's going to be some part of you that knows it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Just based on the golden rule, just based on spiritual intelligence, the fact that you have a heart, no matter how armored and covered in, traumas and wounds and ego, you can have something underneath all that that's going to feel what another person feels and feels bad about it. So I think that part of you is active, and because that part of you is subconscious, and the subconscious is what influences reality, therefore, that part of you is going to influence reality to kind of feedback corrective experiences that kind of assuages that guilt.
Interesting.
But I think at the same time, if you look at material like Rudolf Steiner, others who get into near-death experiences in the afterlife, one interesting thing that they bring up is how after death, after your physical body and your physical brain falls away, you kind of awaken into that higher part of your consciousness. And so therefore, you're going to feel things way more intensely, and you're going to have a bird's eye perspective on your life that you didn't before. And in that state, I think that is where the majority of guilt and remorse and shame and all these bad feelings would arise that would otherwise be suppressed when you're in the body due to, the biological brain being programmed to be a tough ass in life and not care about others and step over others. Ego.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ego, right, exactly. So when that sort of starts to disintegrate because now the body's gone and the physical brain's gone, now you're kind of left naked to yourself and you're able to feel the moral aspect of your life's actions way more intensely. And I think that can induce impulses, feelings, wishes that have a karmic-like effect. Maybe not in this life because you just died, but definitely going forward, like after you go through the afterlife process and you merge with source and you get reprojected from source to try in a new incarnation, I think some of those impulses that you generated beforehand are still there waiting for you to, pick up those tools again and kind of finish what you started. So I think that's where the moralistic aspect comes in. And also if you consider the idea that when you go to sleep each night, you exit your ego, and in the deep, dreamless delta sleep, supposedly your spirit, along with your astral body, kind of goes into the afterlife realm, the same one that you go to after you die, but you're just not as deeply into it. But you go into that realm, and once again, you got this bird's eye perspective on your life. And in that state, that's when, once again, you would have this moralistic impulse about what you did that day, what you did recently, and kind of sowing the seeds for different kinds of karmic-like experiences that are coming up next in your life, back when you're in the body, back in the conscious mind. So I think that's where that sort of figures in. So there's both a mechanistic thing with the law of attraction, and then there's also a moralistic aspect, which uses the law of attraction, but what originates it is a genuine feeling of feeling bad about what you've done. So it's not like karma is solely about what you attract, it's also about what you feel,
Right.
in a way.
Yeah.
And the thing is, some of these psychopaths, the question is, do they even have a spirit that is capable of feeling conscience?
Right.
Because, some of these people, they seem very empty. You can look in their eyes and you can tell, if you're in any way intuitive or even clairvoyant, you can tell that what's behind the eyes is very shallow, like a shark or like a lower animal of some type. It's not very well put together. So it wouldn't surprise me if they don't have conscience at all, and therefore they don't have karma either. But therefore they also wouldn't need karma because there's nothing solid there that would reincarnate, that would need lessons, that would need correction.
Right.
I mean, think about it. If an animal eats another animal in the forest, is that animal going to get karma for doing that? And the answer is no, because that is in its nature. It doesn't have free will. It's not on a path of learning lessons and wisdom and so on. It just is what it is. Like, it's a predator. And so I think we've got these human predators who are really no different other than dressing suits and speaking like a normal human does. But what's behind all that is definitely a lower kind of energy that doesn't have karma necessarily and doesn't have guilt. So I think that's another reason why certain people don't seem to experience blowback necessarily. It's because they're just sharks on two legs, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually an important lesson that a lot of nice and naive people kind of really need to realize more. And by this point in 2023, more people have begun realizing this thing because there's been so much discussion out in the world on TV and on the internet, people talking about the psychopaths and the personality disorder people, the narcissists, the abusers. There's just a lot more discussion going on about it now, but a lot of people still mistakenly believe that these people are just traumatized people. They're like me and you. They just have traumas. They're wounded and all this stuff. And therefore they keep making excuses for them or, whatever. But I really believe, and I've talked about this all over my website, it's one of the main repeating themes of my website, is that there really do seem to be empty people among us that are being piloted by these other forces, these neg forces, hyperdimensional forces. And it's whatever, there's different theories, like whatever works for you. Like some people call them reptilians. Some people say they're archons, demons. There's different terminology, but they're just basically these higher dimensional, interdimensional beings that kind of use a lot of human vessels as their puppet pawns to work through. And so these people aren't people that can be redeemed,
Right. Yeah. And, what I noticed about some of these people is that they don't seem to actually have reality creation powers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why they have to be so good at manipulation and cunning, because they don't get any other metaphysical assistance necessarily. It's almost like they're bred for physical performance in a way, stepping over others, manipulating others through words, being charming, taking what they think is theirs by force, by cunning, by strategy. And that's the kind of universe that they live in. Whereas people like us, anyone who has a spirit, we're going to have that additional metaphysical factor too, like, law of attraction and karma.
And you can be in the divine flow of things, and you have like the divine kind of on your side, keeping you in a good flow, and you got all this other components and assistance happening that they don't have, so they lack what we have.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, that concludes the 4 different types of reality creation situations. So just to recap, we have the manifestation that's done from our own efforts. We have divine intervention and outside higher assistance helping us out. We have synchronicities that can intertwine with manifestation. And then karma, like we were just talking about, and how there's actually a law of attraction component to it, and the moralistic component that you were just explaining. So. And that brings us to our next area of discussion, which is states of consciousness and manifesting methods.
People think that manifesting, they give you the typical formula, which is to kind of close your eyes and immerse yourself in that future situation. And by resonating with it, that's what helps it come about. But the thing is, you don't necessarily have to do that, as we've shown in various examples that we've discussed, because I've had moments where I wasn't trying at all. I was merely just innocently daydreaming, for example, or I was just focusing for other reasons on a particular topic, like alchemy or that awe and wonder example, right? And so I realized that one of the keys to understanding this is there are different levels or different states of consciousness that are at different distances from the subconscious, and therefore from the ability to manipulate reality. So the one we all know, of course, is the waking beta brainwave state. And in this state, that's where you're fully focused right here, right now, or whatever you're thinking about. And in this particular state, which is the everyday, the grind, 9 to 5 kind of mentality, when you're fully locked into this gritty reality, you really cannot reality create from this particular state directly. In order to try to get around that, you would have to use very strong emotions or very strong intentions. So people who are stuck in that mode, they're the ones who have to rely on elaborate rituals, and very intense visualization exercises, things like that, in order to get around the ability to, simply affect reality. Now, what you can also do instead, though, is you can go even deeper than that, and you can go into a kind of relaxed daydream alpha brainwave state. And this one is much better because in this state, you're not necessarily thinking about your surroundings or what you're going to be doing that day or what you got to do tomorrow. It's more a state of total absorption. And, it's where visualization and immersion exercises, where those particular methods of reality creation, that's where they actually become effective. Because you're in this relaxed state with your eyes closed, you're not thinking about anything else, and you're just sort of in the moment, at ease, in this daydream state. So that works pretty well, and that kind of ties into an example I mentioned earlier about the green mirror that I manifested.
Right, yeah.
Because I was just thinking to myself very nicely in this sort of daydreamy kind of state, like, hey, it'd be kind of nice if I had this cool like square mirror with a green border, and I could practice doing some sort of speaking exercises in it. And like I said, later that exact afternoon, my neighbor moves out, and he leaves behind him a perfectly square mirror with a green border, exactly as I had intended. So I was not trying to force my intention on anything. I wasn't doing any elaborate rituals or anything like that. I was just in this alpha state, very at ease, very easy. So, obviously that state is quite ideal. And I've noticed it many other times where I would be thinking, it'd be kind of nice if in this particular state, and things manifest quite quickly in that
same
state.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, those times where I've been able to manifest things down to the letter, I was in that state. I was really immersed in it, and kind of like daydreaming, but immersed. And then there's that slight emotional component, and I'm very detailed about what I want. I want this, and this, and then boom, I get it down to the letter.
Yeah, and because you're not in the beta brainwave state, you're not totally locked into the ego and self-aware with all of its doubts and all of its secondary and tertiary thoughts that interfere with it.
It's like a pure thought. Without any of that interference and doubt and stuff that contradicts and cancels it out.
Yeah, you're kind of at one with yourself and with the thing that you're thinking about. And so it's almost like the line between your inner and outer world starts to dissolve in this state. And I think that kind of helps it happen. So, I mean, obviously in that state, you're closer to your subconscious than you are in the fully waking beta state. Like if you're in heavy traffic and trying to, weave between lanes, I mean, you're in the beta state at that point. You're not in this daydreamy kind of state.
Right.
Yeah. Now, if you were to go even deeper than that, that's where you would enter the so-called mind awake, body asleep state. And in that state, that's where you're half awake and you're half asleep. And I mean, I've had it where I was in this state and it felt to me like I wasn't even really locked into linear time like normal. The sounds in the room, I couldn't even hear them necessarily because it's like my consciousness was slightly decoupled from my physical ears. And when you exit from the state back into the waking state, that's when all the sounds of the room come back in. That's when you can feel your body again. It's interesting if you're conscious and you can notice that. But yeah, so when you're in this sleep paralysis, half awake, half asleep state, I noticed that's an extremely powerful state to reality create in. And, it's amazing what you can do in that state in terms of healing, removing negative entities, entering a lucid dream, astral projection, remote viewing, and you can do all of these things. And in fact, there were some early pioneers of reality creation methods. I think back in the early 1900s. I forgot the guy's name, but that was his method. His method was essentially entering this half awake, half asleep state in the mornings before getting out of bed. And in that state, he found himself both clairvoyant in the sense of being able to tell what would come up that day. And also he found himself able to influence what would happen that day synchronistically, in terms of synchronicities and manifesting and so on. And I think that's because this state is even deeper than the daydreaming state. So you're no longer just an alpha, you're probably in a theta brainwave state when you do this. So that is one level even deeper, and it's even more powerful at reality creation. And I think it's because the gap between the conscious and the subconscious in that state it's smaller than in all the other states that I just mentioned.
Okay.
Now, if you go one state even deeper than that, that's where you're fully asleep. But you could be lucid dreaming, for example. So as I mentioned earlier, a friend of mine was in a lucid dream, and she created her perfect dream job scenario, including what it looked like, what the people looked like, and the whole entire immersive scenario, which she recreated it for real in a lucid dream. And then after she woke up, she got a call from her friend within a very short amount of time, and the friend said, "Hey, I got this job opportunity if you want to take it." And when she went in, it was identical to the thing that she had created in her lucid dream.
Wow.
Yeah. So lucid dreaming, it's kind of difficult to do that consistently. And I have not done it consistently enough to experiment with it to do reality creation.
Yeah.
Because usually when I find myself lucid dreaming, I try to do other things like explore or experiment or something.
I always fly.
Yeah, or fly.
I'm going to fly. That's my big goal in any lucid dream.
Yeah, because you got such a short amount of time.
Right.
Right. So I haven't had the chance to try it, but I totally believe her, and I will try it the next time I get the opportunity.
Yeah.
But it makes sense that it would be even more powerful because you're even deeper in that state than you are in this half awake asleep state, right? So between beta, the alpha, going down into that mind awake body sleep state and fully into the lucid dreaming state, you can see this gradient between being fully separated from your subconscious and getting closer and closer and closer to your subconscious. Because in a lucid dream, what is creating the dream environment? Your subconscious. When you're in a dream and you're touching a dream chair or a dream table, you're literally touching your subconscious when you do that. You're touching it. You're directly in contact with it. And so, since that subconscious then is like a branch to the tree of the universal subconscious that creates waking reality as we know it, it makes sense then that if you create something in a dream like that, then it can affect waking reality as well, way more easily than if you try to simply use typical reality creation rituals from a waking beta state, which a lot of people try that and then they don't get any results because they just never get deep enough within their own consciousness to touch their subconscious.
Right. And then I'm sure there's people listening to this who, when they hear that example from your friend and her lucid dreaming of the perfect, creating the perfect job in her lucid dream, that really calls to mind, like, what is this reality really when you can do that? Like, you can have control reality during a lucid dream, like make it become real. Like, what does that say about our reality? So I know there's got to be a lot of people listening who are thinking that, and trust me, we are definitely going to be getting back into that subject in depth later on. So we're going to drill down on what is this reality really what's happening here and how does this work? So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be talking about the simulation theory and how it compares and contrasts with the idea that we are in a collective dream and maybe it's both.
Right.
So we'll definitely explore that more. But, one of the interesting things about the reality creation methods, what's known about it is that after you do your intention, let's say this is the waking state type method for doing it. So after you set your intention or you immerse yourself in that outcome that you want to realize, you have to forget about it. You have to set it aside. And I find that really interesting. Like, why is it that you have to do that? And to me personally, I think it has to do with a quantum observer effect. Because in quantum physics, when you're directly looking at something or directly measuring something, it's frozen in place. Like, it's locked into one particular state. And it's no longer quantum when you do that. So for example, the double slit experiment, where they send a little electron through two parallel slits in a wall, as long as you're not looking at it or not measuring it, the electron will seem to almost split into a copy of itself and interfere with itself and create these wave patterns on a screen on the far side that the electron then hits. So over time, it creates this weird interference wavy pattern. But if you look at it or measure it, that interference pattern goes away and you just get ordinary like distribution patterns as if it were like little rubber balls you're sending only through one slit at a time. So somehow, observation is able to destroy the quantum effect in a way. And so I'm thinking that, that applies to the present moment, but what about trying to observe or think about or focus on the future? If you are anticipating something constantly, like let's say you just wish for something and now you can't let it go, you're thinking about it constantly without ever giving it a rest, then you're always in a way observing that potentiality.
Right.
And so therefore, in a way, you are freezing it in place and destroying the quantum fluidity or quantum interference that's needed for it to kind of jiggle into place and for your timeline to kind of weave and move and drift into that particular probable future. It can only do that if things are fluid. And they're not fluid if you're constantly thinking about it. So, so I think that's why when you defocus your mind and you enter either a daydream state or that half-awake mind, the half-awake, half-asleep state, mind-awake, body-asleep state, in both of those states, likewise, you're also defocused from your surrounding physical reality because you're not seeing the room, you're not hearing the room, you're not focusing on reality at all. You're just sort of in this internal nebulous in-between state, right? This sort of a liminal state between waking and sleeping. And so it's no surprise then that in that state, reality is also more fluid. And it brings to mind, for example, the one time where I had a dream about looking at a very sharp comb and looking at all the little edges of the teeth of the comb and thinking, okay, that's pretty interesting how the edge of the comb has very sharp teeth. And right then, for real, my phone rings. I wake up and I answer it, and it was a wrong number. And the guy says, hello, is this Edgecombs? Like Edgecombs Auto. It's like an auto store.
Yeah.
That was in Charlottesville. So Edgecombs, and I just had a dream about the edge of a comb, just looking at it.
Right.
And I remember when the phone was ringing, I had a very weird feeling. It felt to me almost as if I wasn't in the same time as when the phone was ringing. So it was like this weird time distortion, like I was sort of tethered to the timeline, but I was outside the timeline slightly. And I think that's why I got this precognitive feedback in my dream. It's because in the dream state, I was slightly outside of time. Things weren't fully assembling like they would be if I were awake and kind of collapsing the quantum wave function into one single possibility. So that proved to me that, when I'm in a dream state, my mind is most definitely not locked into linear time like it would normally be.
Right.
And I think if I'm in a half awake, half asleep state, then okay, it's like that, but not quite as much. And if I'm in a dream state or a daydream state, then I'm also like that, but not quite as much, right? So I think that ties into it too. It's almost like the subconscious is the subconscious is like perpendicular to consciousness. So it's like parallel time as opposed to linear time. And so the closer you get to your subconscious, whether a dream or daydream or something in between, you're likewise going to move perpendicularly across the timeline, and that allows you then drift between different timelines, right? So in quantum physics, when you're focusing on one thing, observing it, you're locking into linear time in a vertical way. But if you kind of defocus your consciousness and maybe enter a dream state or an alpha state, now you're kind of defocusing horizontally and kind of being able to drift sideways between parallel timelines. So I think this could be some of the mechanism behind it. And I think that's also why you have to forget about the thing that you're intending, because you have to free it up so you're not only moving linearly up and down, you're also moving sideways slightly between parallel timelines, and that allows you to drift towards that probable future.
Your description reminded me of the diagrams you use a lot in your articles on the
Right.
website. It's like you are verbally describing the type of diagrams you often use.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it in my head.
Now, one way that this can actually backfire, and I've experienced this multiple times, is if you're in a kind of daydreamy kind of state and you think to yourself, I haven't been sick in a while. That's awesome. And, but the thing is, when I'm doing that, I think that in this daydream state, and I think about the last time I was sick and how it felt, and, just the idea of sickness. And then I feel that was great. So what does my subconscious pick up about it? It picks up the idea that, okay, sickness feels great. Right? And it merges those two together. And what do you know? Within like 1, 2, 3 days, I get sick. This has happened like 4 or 5 times now. And I have to catch myself, when it happens. But occasionally I keep falling for it.
Yeah. I think I've had something similar to that where one time I was looking in the mirror and I was admiring that my skin was nice and clear, and smooth. There was no blemishes, no zits or anything. And I was thinking, wow, I've gone a really long time without any kind of zits. I don't have like acne or anything, but occasionally I'd get like little zits breakouts if I eat too much chocolate or something. I don't know. But I was thinking that, oh yeah, I'm just feeling good. Like I haven't had any zits. And when, starting the next day, major breakout, face covered in little pimples. And I'm like, what? And I think it's the same principle that you just described.
Yeah, because you think about it just so offhand.
Yeah.
And so you're in this daydream state. You're thinking about it. You've got the positive emotion, and then you forget about it immediately afterwards. That's like the perfect formula for manifesting something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, typically they say that the subconscious doesn't understand negatives.
Right.
So if you think like, oh, I'm glad I haven't been sick in a while, it doesn't pick up on the haven't.
Right.
Because if you think about it, it's almost like you're telepathically communicating with a dog, right?
Yeah.
If you want a dog to, I don't know, go lay down on the bed over there in the corner, you think the bed, you think the corner, you think laying down.
Yeah, actually, this is a principle I read about years ago in an animal communication book. And it was something I didn't realize, but I realized I had real life example proof of this with Kitty. But yes, absolutely. Like I didn't realize that with an animal, you don't think or even tell it what you don't want it to do. You need to tell it what you do want it to do, or think in your head what you want it to do instead. Because it's just like your subconscious doesn't understand the no part of the command or the thought that you're having. And when we're mentioning thoughts and telepathy, because animals are very telepathic, especially if it's your pet, you do develop like a telepathic kind of bond with it, and that's something I experienced with Kitty. I learned the hard way one time. I won't get into it, but it's very true. Like with animal communication, you have to just tell them what you do want them to do instead, and not what you don't want them to do, because they do not understand that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and emotion kind of conveys really well through telepathy as well.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Empathy, just picking up on someone else's emotions. It's like one of the most universal and basic forms of psychic powers that we have, that most humans have actually, that are real. We can pick up on another person's feelings, and I think it's because emotion and just visual imagery, that's part of evolution going back millions and millions and millions of years. Whereas words, they've only existed for, I don't know, 300,000 years.
And actually, back to the Matt Fraser, the medium, he's said repeatedly and I've experienced this too when communicating accidentally without expecting it with my dead grandmother, but that's how the dead can communicate as well on the other side. It's not with complicated spoken word sentences. It's like Matt has described and what I experienced. It's emotions, it's feelings, thoughts, images. It's just boom, 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 all this like telepathic stuff all at once. And there might be short clips of words and phrases, but you're feeling stuff, you're sensing stuff. It's just kind of almost like a download of a knowing versus words. Mm-hmm. And so, he's a lot of people, and they post comments on his videos trying to understand how he's able to talk so fast, because they're thinking like that the dead is communicating with these long-winded sentences. They're not. And he tries to explain, he feels the symptoms that they had in their body before they passed. He sees flashes of images. He feels the emotions. And then he does get random words. It's like a big mix, but that's how it actually works. And it's like the primitive form of communication. It's not words. It bypasses the verbal language.
Yeah, and in fact, I remember being a baby, like an infant, before I could even speak. And I remember some of the thoughts that I had, and the thoughts were exactly like that. There were random images, feelings, little memories, and only a few word snippets here and there. And related to that, I also find it interesting that in dreams, for example, in dreams, it's known that if you try to look at a clock or printed words, it's very unstable. It's almost like your subconscious has a hard time rendering words and numbers, like abstract things like that, which speaks to the limitation of symbolic, abstract communication like that versus what the dream can very readily convey, which is emotions, feelings, events, people. And the things that people say, a lot of times it's nonsensical or maybe it's symbolic, but I mean that's still easier than like written things.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a weird connection between all of it, between animal communication, manifesting, trying to reach your subconscious, or what your subconscious is even able to understand and serve up in dreams in terms of this abstract, superficial thing. Because it's pretty much like the beta brainwave, left brain, analytical, abstract, symbolic, like letters and numbers. Those types of things seem to be largely excluded from basic intuitive telepathic communication, or manifesting or anything like that. So I think there's a universal principle there that the right brain, the more like nonlinear aspect to it all, that is what ultimately can reach the subconscious and work through it to affect reality.
Okay, so yeah, that takes us into the next area of discussion concerning beliefs and attitudes in relation to manifestation. And not to state the obvious, but our entire lives can be affected by our beliefs and attitudes, both conscious and unconscious, as we've been delving into in depth all this time. Everything from our personal relationships and our jobs and work life, our money earning potential, what does or doesn't happen to us, from accidents, victimization, good versus bad luck, being in the right or wrong place at the right or wrong time, experiencing fortuitous circumstances on a regular basis or not. So that leads to the subject of targeting, which we'll be getting back to later, actually, big time. I've written about that subject in depth on my website, and it's important to get into here in relation to personal frequency, in relation to personal targeting. And I know some people listening to this will have experienced targeting in various forms. So this is definitely that's a big subject. It's very important. So we'll be getting back to that. But some of this does tie into higher protection, though, as we've been talking about. And as always, discerning the fate that we make, to quote Terminator 2, I love that quote, versus higher divine powers is important. So we may have the ability to set the tone of our lives and to help steer it in particular directions because we do have free will. But there is also higher stuff at work for those with a soul/higher spirit and destiny. And it can and does override things and insert things in when necessary. And I've had a lot of experience with that. I know you've had a lot of experience with that. People listening to this have probably had a lot of experience with that. So that's something a lot of us, we know firsthand.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how it seems like we have a split personality. Because earlier I mentioned the iceberg example and how our conscious mind is merely the tip of the iceberg. So there's this whole other part of our being that we're not even regularly conscious of that seems to have influence over how things go in our lives. And so that's sort of the dichotomy between free will on one hand, which belongs to us, the conscious human part, and the destiny part, or the karma part, which has to do with the subconscious and the higher self, and these other aspects of our being that, as I mentioned, we're not normally conscious of. So it is like we have a split personality where the lower, which is us, doesn't really know the higher, but the thing is, the higher does know the lower. It's always watching. It's like that Sting song, I'll be watching you.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like that, where the higher part of us determines our fate and our destiny and guides the general probabilistic flow of events in our lives. But then we, the lower part, just experience the effects of that, and we make choices in response to it. So it's this interesting back and forth dynamic between the two. It's almost like a programmer designing a game and then test playing it by going into the game, except that he forgets that he's a programmer when he's playing it. Unless you do meditations and spiritual studies and you realize, okay, part of me is the programmer, and you start taking responsibility for that, and you stop loading up your subconscious with all these negative thought patterns that end up influencing the program, and it kind of throws your life off a cliff. So if you think about that, when the conscious part of you tries to do that, tries to influence, or even just naturally influences it through this certain vibe that you're holding, or a certain thing that you're constantly thinking about, I do think that the higher part of you probably knows when you are doing that with bad intentions. And you yourself would know it too. Like, you would feel deep down if what you're intending for is kind of morally ambiguous.
Yeah.
And there's a part of you that doesn't quite buy into it. And the problem is, if you try to bypass that with some really heavy rituals and self-programming tactics, which some of these stupid reality creation courses and workshops, they try to get you to do that, right? They try to get you to bypass some of these safety measures. As I said before, that's when you start heading into black magic territory, because now you're trying to take hold of a higher power, but using it for egotistical purposes.
Yeah.
And that's really bad. That's really dangerous. So yeah, I think the higher does know when you're doing it with bad intentions, but many times I think it allows it, and it maybe even facilitates those particular effects, because it knows that there's a potential that it's going to blow back and teach you a lesson to not do that. And so that's why when you manifest with dark intentions or from a dark place, you're kind of contaminating that entire process with these dark seeds that is starting from. And those dark seeds then bloom and kind of ruin or corrupt the thing that you're trying to manifest. And that's what ends up bringing regret, self-blame and disappointment, disillusionment, and watching all your plans come to nothing because it was contaminated from the start. So,
yeah.
Now, as for the shadow and the subconscious, obviously the shadow part of us seems to have a mind of its own. And the mind that it has is something, it's something that tries to sabotage your own life and sabotage the lives of others in order to grow the shadow within yourself and grow the shadow within others. So people who are very deeply controlled by their shadows, they are net negative influences in the lives of other people. So if you think about like a narcissistic, toxic parent, what good are they really doing for their child? Maybe they're providing a roof, maybe they're providing food, but they're taking away everything else. They're taking away a kid's future potential even by ruining it, by destroying them subconsciously and emotionally and spiritually, psychologically. They're like spiritual plague carriers in a way, spreading this zombie disease of darkness, the Wetiko or Wetiko, as Paul Levy talks about in his books. That thing is what the shadow is truly made of, and we all have it to a certain extent, but some people have it more than others, and some people are fully controlled by it. Right. That's the difference, really. So it has a mind of its own, and it's also in the subconscious, but it's distinct from the better, higher parts of us that are also in the subconscious. The subconscious, as I mentioned, is merely a doorway. So, or actually, it's better to think of it as an elevator shaft, right? So when an elevator door opens, you step in there. Well, now you can access the roof, you can access the basement, you can access, one floor above you. So all these other floors are all accessed through the elevator shaft. And so the elevator shaft, that is the subconscious. But then the roof, that's like the higher self, the shadow, that's the basement, and so on. So, there's a lot of confusion about like, okay, well, what is the subconscious exactly, and how does that relate to the id or the shadow, and how does that relate to the ego and the higher self? Well, that's how it relates. Is that the subconscious is merely the doorway between different levels of your being. And so we've got multiple opposing influences in or through our subconscious. We got the higher divine stuff, and we have these artificial cancerous grafts that are deeper at the lower levels of the subconscious. It's almost like our own internal version of the astral planes, where the lower astral planes, that's where you got the demons and these lost souls that are there being fed upon. And then the higher astral planes, that's where you have the benevolent guiding forces and teachers. It seems like that is mirrored within us, but it's like a microcosm of the macrocosm of the general astral planes that are actually out there that you would access then after death, or through astral projection. So once again, it's this weird as above, so below kind of thing going on. But we have to realize that our subconscious is like our own internal astral plane in a way, and that we have a shadow within us that can counteroppose the influence of the higher self, which is responsible for destiny and fate. And then the shadow then is what grafts upon our life these unnecessary karmic experiences that really aren't needed. They're redundant. They're merely being attracted because there's something in the subconscious that is resonating with that energy that has been unresolved. So it's not so much that there is some lesson to learn about forgiving others or learning how to be a better person. No, it's more just this bleeding wound in the subconscious that's attracting these negative experiences that don't need to be there. And so therefore these negative forces, it's in their vested interest to create as many of these shadow wounds as possible in order to justify a person attracting in painful experiences that these negative entities can then cause and profit off of through the generation of loosh energy and the ensnarement and corruption of the soul. So that's sort of the bigger picture perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, and this, brings up the subject of the ego again and its role in the lives that we draw to ourselves. So, another mistaken idea of the new age is that the ego is a bad thing and that we need to eliminate the ego. And to that, I'm like, wrong. I mean, the ego can be either a positive or a negative thing. And, having an out of control negative aspect of the ego where you're egomaniacal, selfish, narcissistic, abusive, controlling, you don't have any hubris, etc., that's indeed a negative thing. But, conversely, having no ego at all, where you're small, weak, you have no core identity, you feel powerless and meaningless, that's also not good. And that ties back into the anecdote, you used earlier about the poor but nice people of the world where bad things keep happening to them versus the evil elite who seem to skate through life without any karma. Because again, they might, the whole small, weak thing and feeling powerless and meaningless. So that is part of it as well in terms of ego.
One important thing about that is it seems to me like a lot of life lessons, they don't simply revolve around, here's how to be a better person towards others. Here's how to be not so mean to others. Some life lessons are actually geared towards teaching you how to stand up for yourself.
Right.
Be stronger, be more centered in your sovereign identity, I guess, your sovereign power. And so that's an example of a higher divine spiritual curriculum giving the thumbs up, giving the green light to building up some sort of a positive ego within yourself.
Right.
And likewise, as you just mentioned, how I mentioned earlier, people with almost no ego that are just very small and meek, they're the ones that get trampled on like mice.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier or not, but just the idea of when you said that's the lesson to learn how to stand up for yourself. And I said that, I think I mentioned earlier, because I have an article on my website called New Age Love and Light Fallacies, and I talked about it there, that a lot of New Agers mistakenly believe that when all these bad things are happening to them, it's for a reason and they have to suffer and all that, and they don't understand it's happening to teach you how to stand up for yourself so you can get it to stop happening. You got to learn that. That's the lesson you need to learn. But as always, with the ego, it's a matter of striking that balanced middle ground. You have the positive ego giving you that solid core identity, the whole know thyself concept. If you don't know thyself and you don't have a solid identity, then how are you ever going to rise up or stand your ground and push back against the neg forces of this reality? They're trying to hurt you and push you around. And that doesn't just mean higher negs and demons. I mean, I'm talking about even the everyday bully variety, the predators and the bullies that hone in on you and target you or go after you. So that's where having that positive aspect of the ego comes into play to help learn how to defend yourself and stand up for yourself.
Yeah, and if you think about what happens then if you teach an entire society to try to get rid of their ego and to not even have a core identity.
Right.
What happens? Well, at that point, because you just mentioned bullies and how you need an ego to stand up to them. Well, societally, that's how you get a totalitarian society, like a totalitarian hive mind society like you have in communist China, for example. You got this totalitarian government, and you've got a people that have been culturally conditioned to sacrifice themselves for the collective, like a hive, like ants.
Yep. Yeah. And then also, when you don't have that solid core identity and you don't know thyself, it's it's easier to try to manipulate you into believing things that are inverted and doing things that are bad. So you can become highly manipulatable. So, I mean, a really good example of that is things that were trying to be done to me during what seems to me to be memories of my lab's experiences, which for people who may not be familiar, my lab stands for military abductions. So I talk about that a lot on my website. I have a book about my labs and mind control, but I have memories where I'm in various situations which definitely seem to correlate with abductions, and which I have, as a side note, indicators of once I'm awake in the real world again, indicators on my body and other indicators that show that an abduction did happen. Some sort of thing really did happen. It's not an active imagination or a dream. But where during these experiences, there I am, I can see myself in the memory pushing back and like, no, despite being what seems to me, from what I could tell, I was either drugged or tranced out, or a combination of both. So there's either some kind of mind control trancing being done and or some sort of a drugging to get me in a very compliant, manipulatable state. But yet, despite that, there I am pushing back and saying no. And that was my positive ego core, me knowing myself, So those with no ego or low self-esteem, thinking of themselves as nothing, having no identity, being empty inside, they won't have that thing that pushes back. They're weak, and they just get absorbed, easily pushed around, controlled, manipulated, becoming part of the hive, as you mentioned. One of the sheep, they can't think for themselves. They have no bravery to stand up on their own and fight. So that's another component. Having the positive ego core gives you bravery because something's wrong. You know yourself enough to know that, no, this isn't me. And it gives you that bravery to push back. So, people in communist China, like you mentioned, no, they don't have bravery. They're all full of fear. Hive mind, weak, powerless, and very fearful. So that's a good example of that. And many New Agers won't even acknowledge the negative aspects of reality in general, or negs, and I mean like of the demonic variety. So of course they don't get this concept about the positive aspect of the ego, and that it's not a black and white issue, all or nothing. Like the ego is just all bad, because it's not. But all this talk about ego ultimately ties back into reality creation, because if you have that positive, balanced aspect of the ego, you will have more confidence and self-assured fight in you, and therefore won't find yourself always experiencing so much bad luck and trampling by life. You're not constantly emitting vibes of weakness, helplessness, powerlessness. The idea of I'm nothing and nobody, I don't matter. So, and unfortunately, on a side note, a lot of us out there have been given that message through our upbringings in some way, shape, or form, either directly by our own quote-unquote parents, or people around us and bullies and things. We've received that message in life that gets put into our subconscious. But, it's up to us. We got to recognize if that's happened and start reprogramming ourselves.
Yeah, well, not to mention people who are under demonic attack. One of the key things that keeps coming up is the demons trying to posture themselves as all-powerful. And the person has no power at all. And actually, right, so they're kind of chipping away more and more at the person's positive ego, trying to whittle it down into a nothingness, so the person gives up and therefore becomes like a puppet spun in the spidery cocoon of the demon that's playing these mind games for months, years, whatever, lifetime. So that's like a more direct, obvious example, but a weaker version of that happens to millions and millions and millions of people just through upbringing and society and school and media.
Yeah, and granted, when it comes to the subject of demons, on a side note, like nags, demons, archons, whatever people want to call them, whatever terminology you want to use, yeah, they do have power. Absolutely. I've always said this. Like, they absolutely can be very scary. They have a lot of power. It's a whole subject in itself. I've talked a lot about nags on my site and my different experiences with them, from the mundane up to the very scary. And yeah, they have power. Absolutely. But so don't we. And that's the thing they don't want us to know, that we do have power. We have free will. And they manipulate us to believe that they have more power than they do. And that's us giving up our free will to them, to allow them to manipulate us to believe something that's not true.
Right.
Granted, they do have power, but they do not have all power. And especially not if you're spirited, higher soul, tapped into really higher positive stuff, and you rise up and tap into that while empowering yourself and kind of pushing back against them, they don't want you to know that you can do that and that it will work. And I have a lot of different anecdotes where I have done that, and I've gotten neg attacks to stop, gotten them off me, gotten them away from me. And they don't like the fact I figured that out, and that I've told the world on my website and in interviews that you can do that and how to do it. So, I mean, it's a whole subject in itself, but yeah. But, again, getting back to what we were just saying, I mean, we'll keep getting trampled in life and bullied and pushed around and abused until we finally learn the lesson, which is to develop a healthy, positive ego core that knows itself and can stand up for itself. The healthy aspect of the ego transcends the physical 3D personality, astrology, genetics, environmental, and cultural influences, and extends up to the soul level and will be something that we carry with us from lifetime to lifetime. Who we are on a soul level, basically.
Yeah. So it has to do with your spirit, essentially. Like,
yes.
How brightly your God spark shines and how strong and cohesive and well put together it is.
Right.
It seems to me almost like, it's almost like forging a piece of metal in a blacksmith shop, whether a sword or something. Why does it keep getting hammered? Well, it's getting hammered because it's getting forged. It's getting refined. And so, some people, their ego, their positive ego core, their spirit, or their connection to spirit is quite brittle, right? So it's easily shattered by negative experiences early in childhood, for example. But other people, they incarnate with an already existing strong positive ego core. And so once you have that, then it's more resistant to being shattered.
Yeah.
So instead of being shattered, the blows that it experiences actually end up forging it even more into an even stronger thing in life, right? So it's almost like the weak are made weaker and the strong are made stronger through the same exact catalytic, traumatic experiences sometimes.
Yeah, and again, not to say that the traumatic experiences don't chip away at even the spirited who have that strong ego core. It does, but you're maybe liable to come through it a little bit better and more intact than somebody else who didn't come in as strong to begin with and then goes through a lot of the same experiences. It can ruin people. And that's what happens oftentimes in this reality. Many people just get completely derailed by the things that are going on here.
Yeah, I mean, things are pretty tough here.
Yeah, it is.
It seems like souls sign up for more than they can handle once they get here.
You always read about that too. People talking about they're having these regressions, past life and between life regressions, just describing what's going on in the higher planes before they come here. And it's always that whole biting off more than they can chew sort of thing. Put more on their plate than they can handle. You always see that. Oh, it looks so easy from up here, but then you get down in it. And this place is very heavy. The vibe here is very heavy. And it can be very negative, and we can oftentimes find ourselves surrounded by a lot of very, very negative beings and puppets that are being piloted.
Right.
So it's a whole subject in itself, but yeah.